If you looked at the map in a Japanese social studies textbook, or any official map of Japan, you'd see Honshu, Hokkaido, Okinawa, and all the islands you've heard of that make up Japan. But you'd also see this group of islands just off the northern coast that you might not be aware of. Comprising an area roughly the size of the US state of Delaware, these islands are collectively referred to as hoppōryōdo, or the Northern Territories, and are a region within Hokkaido Prefecture. At least, that's the official word of the Japanese government. But in reality, these islands aren't controlled by Tokyo, but instead by Moscow. This is Russia's slice of Japan. These islands have Japanese names like Etorofu, Kunashiri, and Shikotan. They were once home to thousands of Japanese and assimilated Ainu people and are considered by the government to be an integral part of Japan. But for the past 80 years, they've been controlled and administered by Russia, a presence Tokyo refers to as an illegal occupation and pushes as an injustice to the former residents who were forcibly expelled en masse. The issue is a major stain on Russian-Japanese ties and has dominated relations between the two countries for decades, with Japanese leaders repeatedly raising the issue with their counterparts in the Kremlin and demanding a resolution for decades. The islands were a key priority of former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, who listed his failure to secure a solution as one of his greatest regrets. And Japan's current leader, Takaichi Sanae, was formerly Abe's minister in charge of Northern Territory affairs. But if you're the Japanese government, you have a big problem. Well, multiple problems, in fact. The Russian government has essentially no willingness or incentive to give in to Japan's demands. And while Moscow was long happy to placate Tokyo with low-level discussions, non-binding declarations, and modest concessions, even those have dried up since relations between the two countries soured following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Also, Japan's ties to the islands grow weaker and weaker every year, while Russia's only grows stronger, as the population of former Japanese residents dies off, while the islands have now been home to thousands of Russian citizens for multiple generations. But perhaps the greatest threat to Tokyo's position is the fact that, according to polls, fewer and fewer members of the Japanese public place a priority on the issue or are even aware of it. So what exactly is Japan's connection to these islands, and how did they end up in the hands of Russia? Russia and Japan have actually been competing over the Northern Territories in the greater region since the late 18th century, as Russia's imperial ambitions stretched east and Japan's stretched north. From the 1800s onward, the two countries split control of the islands and were locked in an on-again, off-again conflict over them, at least until the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. Which resulted in Japan's near-complete domination of the region. While that became the status quo for around half a century, the Russians sought revenge in the closing days of World War II. In a lesser chronicled chapter of the war, the Soviet Union entered the conflict against Japan after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. And in the roughly 2 weeks between the time Japan announced its surrender in 1945 and the time when the surrender was accepted and formalized by the Allies, the USSR invaded Japan's northern holdings, seizing control of everything up until Hokkaido. The Soviet Union officially annexed the islands and began sending citizens to settle them in 1946, and expelled the Japanese residents in 1947. Central to Japan's argument in favor of the return of the Northern Territories is the idea that they're an integral part of the country, no different than Kyushu or Shikoku, and completely separate from the occupied territories that Japan seized across Asia and the Pacific during its brutal imperial period. Unlike regions such as Taiwan or Sakhalin, Japan maintains that it never officially relinquished the Northern Territories, and that they're inherently Japanese, having never belonged to another state and being geographically and historically linked to Japan. But the status quo has largely remained unchanged for 8 decades. Even after the diplomatic thaw following the end of the Cold War. Despite numerous high-level discussions, essentially the only progress made was an agreement that allowed former Japanese residents special trips to the islands to visit graves, travel to their former homes, and hold discussions with Russian residents. But after Tokyo publicly opposed Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and imposed sanctions, Russia cut off even the visits, and declared that it no longer recognizes the territorial dispute with Japan and considers the issue settled. But in the eyes of the Japanese government, the dispute is far from resolved. And while it fades from the public consciousness, the authorities have doubled down on their efforts to keep it relevant. February 7th has been designated Northern Territories Day, which includes a national rally for the return, which was attended by the Prime Minister herself earlier this year. Tokyo's stance has even been incorporated into school curriculum, and officials have been pretty open in their efforts to use the education system to influence the opinions of young people. One prefectural government panel wrote that the priority is to educate young people and nurture the successors of the movement for the return. But while government officials and advocates continually call for the return of the islands, or at least some kind of resolution, it remains unclear how this might actually occur, given each side's unyielding positions and 80 years of failure to make progress. All the while, the Northern Territories form yet another potential flashpoint of conflict between Japan and its neighbors. And even if Japan somehow managed to take control of the Northern Territories, the fate of the thousands of Russian people who have lived there for generations would need to be carefully addressed, lest history repeat itself.
Yeah.